Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session of the second annual QTRIC Smart Mobility, Low Carbon and Smart Mobility Technology Conference. My name is Karen Cameron, CEO of the Ontario Public Transit Association, and it's my privilege to be moderating this afternoon's panel, Regulating Ourselves into and Out of Smart Mobility, the Canadian Regulatory Landscape for Connected and Automated Vehicles. OPTA is a huge supporter of QTRIC, so we're very pleased to be participating this afternoon. And I myself am a student of regulation, so this is a very interesting marriage for me, and I'm interested in being part of this discussion this afternoon. It's also a very interesting time from a regulatory perspective. Our current environment with COVID-19 has had to implement solutions far quicker than we could have ever imagined. Given some of the long discussions that we have about regulation and the benefits, the concentrated benefits and dispersed costs of different solutions. This is an interesting context. You need look only at the idea and the debate about wearing masks on transit. And in that case, there are those who believe that a top-down mandate of mandatory masks for all is where we should go, where others believe that local solutions is the best way to approach it. And we have a combination of both. And so with that context, it's my pleasure to introduce our first panelist today. Shigithia Devedran is the project lead, Automated Vehicles, with the City of Toronto. Shigithia, thank you for starting off this afternoon's discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Karen, for the introduction as well. Just wanna ensure that our slides are up there. Perfect. So Karen did the tough part of introducing myself. I'm a project lead at the City of Toronto in the Transportation Services Division. We belong to the Strategic Policy and Innovation Unit. So AVs is one file of many that we're working on. The picture there is our AV team. We can go over to the next slide. So in describing what we're doing in the City of Toronto around automated vehicles, especially as it relates to transit, I will say that from 2016, we've sort of been researching what the impacts might be on our day-to-day operations, but I've included an image from Transport Canada's guidelines for trial organizations because they do a great job of sort of breaking down each level of government's responsibilities within this arena. So Ontario is a bit unique in that we have an AV pilot program that really sets the parameters for AV testing. But in looking at the municipal areas of responsibility, a lot of our work is focused on enforcing regulation, understanding what the infrastructure impacts might be, looking at managing our own passenger transportation, and of course, parking, traffic control, public education. What we've also done, however, is work with industry, nonprofits, and our own internal staff in identifying any additional gaps in our day-to-day operations. And that has really formed the foundation of our automated vehicles tactical plan. This is actually the City of Toronto's strategy around addressing automated vehicles, and it speaks to a number of other initiatives that we think are important. Moving on to the next slide. So regulation is definitely one of the most important factors in addressing AVs, especially in the transit world. In terms of our municipal responsibilities, regulation tends to be a bit more in the long term, especially as it relates to our bylaws. So we've also looked at a few other levers in dealing with AVs. Policy is, of course, key. We've looked at all of our city strategies and looked at the impact there. But pilots are also very important for us in terms of how we want to influence this technology. It allows us to really learn about the operational parameters, allow us to see what the technical difficulties might be, as well as have the staff become more aware of the technology itself. The third lever is procurement. And procurement, even in developing our RFP for a shuttle trial that I'll introduce you to over in the next slide, we learned a lot about what some of the challenges were. So we have a number of projects around automated vehicles. We have about 73 actions in our tactical plan, but we've sort of isolated 5 major projects that we want to deal with over the next few years. The 3 ones related to regulation, I would say, are 1 to 3. So our automated shuttle trial is a proof of concept pilot that we're doing in collaboration with Metrolinx and TTC, our regional and local transit agencies. And as I mentioned, it's really a matter of learning some of the parameters for a technology like this and if it even fits into our system. The second project is our Transportation Innovation Zone. So this is broader than AVs, but we really want to figure out a process and location for testing transportation technology. And in doing that, we are also able to learn what sort of environments they work in and what we would need both on the streets and within our own processes. The last one is our testing, response, and incident preparedness work. This is really in response to Ontario's pilot program where driverless testing is now allowed. and municipalities are now notified if testing occurs on our streets. Internally, we wanted to be sure that we had a process for receiving these notifications, that our emergency responders were also prepared for this. So last slide over, I believe. Great. So some of our next steps in dealing with automated vehicles, especially as it relates to regulation in transit, I think one of the major challenges for across the board is COVID. It's changed the automated vehicle industry more broadly, but it's also made us re-look at some of our own processes within the project. So understanding what physical distancing and sanitizing looks like in a post-COVID world, understanding what that means for trials. But outside of that, what we've heard from industry and some of our stakeholders is that industry education and communication is also key for us. A lot of members of the industry have mixed familiarity with our federal, provincial, and municipal regulations. We have a lot of questions around what testing might look like. So we want to make that clearer over the next few years. Jurisdictional powers and responsibilities, just understanding each level of government and communicating with them throughout is very important to us. We have great staff relationships. So we want to continue to do that around AV integration, testing, and interjurisdictional reporting. And then finally, accessibility standards, I think, is one of the challenges we've realized more recently. There are varying standards across jurisdictions, and a lot of what's being applied to automated shuttles is coming directly from standards for automated buses. So understanding how we need to adapt that in an automated world. Privacy and cybersecurity is broader than just transit. I think this is one of our key issues around AVs, ensuring that we know the regulatory landscape as it relates to this, and that we're prepared when AVs are introduced in a mass way. And then finally, again, in the long term, looking at our own municipal bylaws and what that means on our streets. So I'll end it there, and I'm happy to answer more throughout the questions. I think you're muted, Karen.
Muted. Thank you there. Thank you for that. And thank you for introducing that aspect of jurisdictional powers and responsibilities, the role of relationships. I'm sure we'll get questions from the audience on that later. I'd like now to introduce Jean-Éric Forridio with the Quebec Ministry of Transportation. Jean-Éric, we'll turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me. So yeah, I just took a quick note on myself. In the fall of 2019, I joined the Sustainable Mobility Policy and Electrification team at the Ministry of Transport of Quebec in order to coordinate initiatives that are part of Quebec's broad plan to deploy intelligent transportation systems throughout the province. I can give a brief perspective of the plan. But if we just go back in time, I, for more than 20 years, worked as a technology and information security architect. So I was responsible for conceiving and deploying redundant and robust infrastructures. They were dedicated to online services, to businesses and citizens. So that puts me in the know about pretty much everything there is to know regarding technology from a back-end perspective. But since 2014, I focused my work on competitive financing and governance in projects. So projects that are really data-driven. So that's really comes in handy for automated and connected vehicles. And in 2016, well, I joined the Economics Policy Unit for the transportation of goods on by trucks at the Ministry of Transport. And that was truly a learning curve for me, learning to deal with all aspects of technology deployment, especially regarding the politics of it all. A true from theory to the practice experience, if you will. To the next slide. Yes, thank you. Now, who are we? Who is Transport Quebec and what does it do? Well, the goal of the ministry is to provide means for people, for moving people, sorry, and goods safely, efficiently, and sustainably across the province, much like any other provincial transport ministry in Canada. We're aiming to improve quality of life and support now globally competitive companies. We're also a frontliner in the organization of transport systems. We're a major user of intelligent transportation systems, which makes us familiar with some of the technological advancements. We provide growing leadership among all stakeholders, whether they be for public transport corporations, municipalities, ports, private transportation companies. The ministry is also a good guiding partner in choices of projects, and we're also supported by various government agencies. So that puts us in a good position for maximizing efficiency and information sharing. That's the most important thing. It's to provide interoperability between ITS systems. That's really what drives the added value. And I guess that's when the fun begins, right? All right. So it's all everything we do is all summed up in one huge program. Of course, that's the way public administrations do, right? They set up programs. This time, which aims at rolling out Quebec's intelligent transportation systems. Phase one is really to draw a complete portrait of ITS in Quebec, including those of partners. Now we have over 65 partners, which makes for a lot of ITS systems. We're currently in the midst of that, and we'll if I can clarify the practical needs of the ministry and all stakeholders. Everybody has a very general idea of where they want to go in terms of ITS and smart corridors, but it's another thing to know precisely. So the program of this master plan, if you like, also allows us to set up an ITS architecture that reflects Quebec's needs, but it's according to Canadian guidelines. And it defines objectives, initiatives, and a series of activities according to a very precise decision-making criteria. All that for the next 10 years. So yeah, ambitious to say the least. Very demanding, challenging, no doubt. But again, where's the fun if you don't try? Right? That's what I say. All right, the next slide. The ultimate goal is in the next 10 years, by 2030, is for Quebec to become a North American leader in sustainable and integrated mobility. All efforts to achieve a connected and low carbon transportation ecosystem, you know, hopefully contributing to our prosperity and meets the needs of citizens and businesses. Sorry. All that was framed, as I mentioned earlier, in the Sustainable Development Policy put together in the last 3 years. And that provides 11 frameworks covering every aspect on the matter. And the second framework aims directly at providing information transportation systems and smart corridors. And that's where I come into play. That's it. Thank you.
Right on time. Thank you very much, Jean-Eric. You our local expert for any questions that we have on data architecture then. And you mentioned something I'm sure no one has had to deal with, that's the politics of technology. So perhaps we will have some questions about that as well.
Oh, trust me, everybody needs to deal at one time with politics.
We'll have a half an hour to explore that very soon. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Tara Irwin. Tara is with the Transportation Business Group with HDR. Tara?
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Hi, everyone. I'm Tara, and I'm really excited to be a part of this cool online conference today. I'm the Vice President at HDR, as Karen was saying, where I oversee kind of all of our transportation practice for Eastern Canada. But I've actually spent the majority of my career working in transportation and transit planning. I am an engineer, but I do a lot of planning work, and what that means is I spend a lot of time envisioning what the future is going to look like. I have a passion for developing infrastructure that promotes a sustainable future, focuses on maximizing person capacity throughput, and providing multimodal options for all users. And my projects have been primarily bus rapid transit studies, LRT studies, and environmental assessments. And with those sorts of projects, I really spend a great deal of my time focused on consultation. And and bringing the perspectives of others together, because I think that that is really fundamental to projects being successful. And those can be public agencies, transit agencies, community stakeholder groups, as well as the general public. Next slide. Okay. So HDR, a little bit about HDR. We're a global company with over 10,000 talented staff, but in Canada, we have 6 offices that span the country and over 200 engineering professionals that have delivered award-winning projects in partnership with our progressive clients. And a sample of the service offerings that we offer relevant to this topic that we're discussing today are multimodal transportation planning, transit planning, electrified mobility, traffic operations, transit signal priority, and macro and micro modeling. Next slide. So a sample of some of the key initiatives that are making HDR a leader in this space include multimodal planning. So that's where we're coordinating alongside architecture, land use planning, everything from hospital planning, campus planning, airport planning, all of this, and covering still those sorts of impacts, like impacts to parking and impacts to curb management. Electrification, where we focus on transit fleet adoption of zero emissions mobility and technology, and we can coordinate among the infrastructure, which is the power delivery, and the users' power consumption, and we have the engineering expertise in both, which is very complementary. We're also working with smart cities, so looking at various applications of advanced mobility to help cities improve their transportation systems and find efficiencies for those systems. And lastly, as Jean-Eric was talking, ITS, right? The backbone systems and infrastructure that support advanced mobility and traffic management. So this can include the communications infrastructure, smart signals, and TSP, or transit signal priority. Next slide. Okay, and lastly, what are the key challenges that we see looking ahead with transit automation? Change takes time and is never easy. So some of the key challenges that we're going to be, confronting or looking at head on is who holds liability in the event of an incident? Labor, right? What is the impact on jobs, both current jobs today and how that's going to impact jobs in the future? A general change in the role of the transit agencies who operate autonomous shuttles in order to accommodate that first and last mile. And the always present question, funding. Funding is difficult to secure, and people don't always want to fund or foot the bill for innovation. And the last one is with respect to data, who is going to have ownership of this data and keeping it secure? So that's it for me. I'll turn it back over to you, Karen.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to resume here. We're going to go to some questions for the group then, and in some earlier discussions, we're all very, very interested to know what regulatory considerations need to be taken into account if we are thinking of deploying AV shuttles on behalf of public transit, where the city or region owns the vehicle fleet and is responsible for it, rather than the individual household owners. Shigithia, can I ask you for your thoughts on that?
Yeah, perfect. And I think it's building off of that last slide that I presented a little bit earlier. I think foremost is definitely vehicle standards. And I mentioned accessibility standards. Something I heard from our project manager, Lindsay Wigginton, who actually spoke at QTRIC yesterday as well on the shuttle trial she's leading, was even in developing the RFP, figuring out sort of what accessibility standards should be incorporated when looking for a vendor, was sort of a lot of consultation with our regional and local transit agencies, but also trying to interpret these varying pieces of accessibility standards across jurisdictions, as well as what's provided from other levels of government. So trying to interpret that for a new technology and a new vehicle model is something that's still in the works, and I think we're still trying to figure out. But outside of accessibility, just vehicle standards as a whole, I think is going to be a challenge for automated shuttles and automated transit specifically. We still don't have at the federal level any specific automated transit vehicle standards or automated vehicle standards. There's a lot of recommendations, but having that sort of written out would be super helpful at a local level for us.
Thank you. Jean-Eric, anything to add?
Well, I always tend to look at things from an infrastructure point of view, rarely from a vehicle standpoint to begin with. And that's primarily, I guess, because of my experiences, the way I was brought up, if you like, where I worked always the back end of IT, not relying on the end user and the client side, because there's a lot of hype regarding automated vehicles. They're coming, it's imminent, and then time goes by, and then project pilots keep not exactly delivering the expected results. I'll grant you sometimes it's because the needed resources and technologies in these pilots just haven't put in place. But at the end of the day, the infrastructure is still key to success. Not wanting to undermine the critical importance of artificial intelligence and key elements in the like key elements in the environment and the surroundings have to be put in place or removed for fully automated vehicles to safely and effectively operate. So we all believe in artificial intelligence. We all believe it would do the trick, and I remain a firm believer in the development of AI and what it can accomplish. And one day we'll get there, but the only of limits to, so we can push back to those limits. It's like a never-ending cycle, if you like. And we're far from the 1970s when we solely had to rely on the infrastructure, to have a guided wire for automated vehicles to operate. But we're slowly realizing, I think, that we still need a lot of elements in the infrastructure to guide those vehicles. So the legal format around that is just isn't there yet.
Well, thank you. Tara, with both your engineering hat and your transportation planning hat on, Jean-Eric has touched on the infrastructure side. Shigithia has rightly mentioned issues around accessibility, since autonomous vehicles have such a potential for seniors and people with disabilities. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so when I think of this a question, I guess I approach it in a little bit of a different way, as all the panelists have so far. We're in the process of doing a study for the Ministry of Transportation Ontario, and that's their Greater Golden Horseshoe Transportation Master Plan, and part of that has us, forecasting out to 2070, right? So when we're looking that far in the future, we had to consider and run some scenarios, and we started to look at what some of the different regulation scenarios could be, and we looked at non-regulation, a personal use focused, and then having the transit or mobility as a service supportive scenario. And in the no regulation, you essentially let AVs roll out without implementing any policies to control their growth or impact. With a personal use focus, we're looking at scenarios that emphasize on making connected autonomous vehicles as efficient as possible and implementing parking strategies and road pricing to control congestion. But then in the last one, the transit and mobility as a service, we're really looking at the transit-oriented scenario where we have very low personal vehicle ownership. And what this really does for us is that this helps with the first and the last mile connections, and overall leads to fewer vehicles on the road, reducing parking needs and just reducing congestion overall. So I think we just need to think in terms of these different scenarios when we're looking to apply some of the regulatory considerations that we've heard earlier.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. We do have some other prepared questions, but we're getting some great questions from the audience. So I'd like to jump over to that. Starting with a question, First Nations partners have expressed their desire for full linguistic inclusion in interfaces to on-demand and automated vehicles. How can we ensure linguistic inclusion for all without stalling innovative projects? No, I'm not sure that I've heard anyone speak to that. Tara or Jean-Eric or Shakithia, who would like to take that one on?
I can speak quickly to sort of how we're tackling that from a policy lens. I think it goes back to what Jean-Eric said around understanding AI and the private sector moving towards where it is. But there's a lot of conversations with levels of government on what they'd like to see and how we'd like to shape this and sort of what the business model is that would be most helpful for us. One thing we've done within our automated vehicles tactical plan, which is that broad policy document, throughout our extensive consultation, the linguistic piece did come out quite extensively alongside other issues, including those for the disability community, ensuring that there's noise so that it's not too quiet when these vehicles are moving. So we actually have an equity section within our tactical plan that speaks to incorporating mechanisms that allow for all non-Anglophones to be able to work with these various pieces of technology as well as a few other equity pieces. So we're really starting from that policy lens to start to really try to begin shaping this. And then I don't know if that's going to get to a regulatory place in the future, but that's how we've begun to sort of tackle that issue.
I think that's a great start to answer that question. Jean-Eric, can I ask if you have dealt with this aspect?
No, I'm taking notes here. I've not only have I never dwelled into this, I did not anticipate this. I know the CBC broadcasts in 9 different languages: it's English and French, and then 7 Aboriginals. So definitely we'll swing this by my colleagues at Intergovernmentals and Aboriginals Affairs.
That's the beauty of this format.
Absolutely.
Tara, yes, Tara, would you like to add?
I don't think I have really too much to add on this other than kind of just, I think this falls into the accessibility wheelhouse of the things that we need to address as we look forward, and that, you know, language and linguistics, in addition to, you know, other disabilities are all things that we need to consider as we move forward in order to make this transition more seamless.
Yes, thank you. Jean-Eric, I will come back to you. We have a question that's specifically referencing that you mentioned the political hurdles. Can you start us off with a discussion about what can be done to gather more support and better communicate the benefits related to the deployment of smart technology on Canadian roads?
Well, the current situation we're in definitely helps. COVID-19 has enabled us to leap jump a couple of the hurdles that we were facing. I feel that in some sense we've stepped forward a couple of years and into the future. I was on the phone just prior to this meeting with the transit corporations in Quebec. That their main goal now is to find out exactly how many people are on board a bus, and to make sure they can broadcast that information to everyone. Stay safe, you know. And the data sharing around that. It's like the legal and political issues around it have been alleviated. It's absolutely wonderful to see people coming together. Little sad to see that it took a world's pandemic. We're always looking to sitting down with our partners and establish a legal framework where they can exchange data very freely and put it in the warehouse and add get an added value from that data sharing. But yeah, the current situation, and we'll make sure we're using this as a stepping stone, no doubt. We'll be able to show this as an example when at one time data sharing was easy. So yeah, and setting priorities was easy. So it's like laying the ground for a framework on how to do things, how to proceed. Because we've got 65 different partners in Quebec. This is not easy. This cannot be easy. I mean, and you've got people from the private sector, they're competitors among themselves, and you're telling them, hey, let's share data. Yeah, of course. They're not.
I think we have other questions that are coming in from a data sharing perspective. So thank you for that, Jean-Eric. Tara, can you maybe share some of your experience with getting that support and better communicating the benefits on the way to overcoming those political hurdles?
Sure. I think a lot of this comes down to, in order for us to have seamless systems, right, and a really connected infrastructure that's going to serve in the future, is we really need all those different levels of governments, you know, working together, right, making sure that there is strong communication on these projects, and that you're bringing in all of the different stakeholders. Because I think Mayor Crombie talked about it too, you know, over the lunch hour during, you know, her keynote session. And the travel between interregional and everything, it has to be seamless, and it's not going to be seamless unless we're all collaborating and all working together. And it's just about getting everyone on the same page.
That's it. Shigithia, Toronto is not political at all. There's some lessons that you've learned over the last 5 years?
Sorry, I had some Wi-Fi trouble, so I may have missed the original question. If you could just quickly repeat that.
Oh yes, happy to do that. We were looking at the political hurdles, wondering what can be done to gather more support and better communicate the benefits related to the deployment of smart technology on Canadian roads.
Great, and I know we've had a lot of discussion on data. I'd say the one piece I might add is political will is a big step in really getting things done, even at the municipal level. So if there's an interest at the political level to introduce this technology in a way that remains equitable and sustainable and fits all of our city goals, we really need champions within the political network as well. So I think that's something that we're working towards as a next step. We've had a lot of staff level work done, and thankfully it's been approved by our city council now, our strategies and some of our work behind it. But having that champion pushing forward towards a future that meets our existing goals is really key for us as well.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm going to jump back to a question that the panel has already talked about. Obviously, you know, I'm very reluctant to refer to silver linings when we're talking about COVID, since it has been such a devastating pandemic. But in a COVID-19 world, is there any benefit to integrating autonomous and connected shuttles to help overcome the challenges of social distancing and pandemic? Jean-Eric, you were mentioning your call just before this. Can we get you to expand again on your thoughts there?
I'm sorry, you want me to?
Well, yes, you were just mentioning about how you know, the benefits of integrating autonomous and connected shuttles to help overcome the challenges of social distancing that
Right.
transitions are having, you know, in the context of this pandemic. Would you like to say some more about that?
Yeah, it's the political will. That's really in line, and also we're breeding champions all over the place. So that is really wonderful. Local initiatives that are being brought forward. It's truly people coming together, government agencies working together. There is a silver lining in all this, absolutely, from a data driven and sharing standpoint. Absolutely.
Tara, do you have any specific projects that you've been working on, or some aha moments over the last few months on that topic?
Well, with many of the projects, right, some of the stuff we're looking at is how does our infrastructure look as we move forward in order to accommodate social distancing. But I guess aside from that, the one thing I want to bring up about kind of these, you know, smaller autonomous shuttles and vehicles to help, it's great if COVID can push it forward. But at the same time, I think we still want people getting on mass transit, right? That's how we have fewer, you know, vehicles on our roadway. If everyone's getting into these individual kind of shuttles, we're adding chaos to the system, and we're actually you know, not going to necessarily be meeting our goals. I think where the autonomous shuttles have really been helpful in COVID, I know even in the US, they've been using them to transport tests, right, from actual testing sites. And, you know, they put them on these shuttles and then they get them to the labs, right? And this enables things to kind of work sort of 24/7 and fewer touch points in contact. So I guess I just have maybe a bit of a different view of how that would just create more cars and congestion on the roads. So I don't think it's the end all and be all, but it might. I completely support the fact that it's maybe giving us a push in the right direction and to look at it for goods movement even as well, right? We're seeing lots of you know, people now ordering online, those who weren't comfortable doing it before. So,
Right.
you know, there's an opportunity for these shuttles to really help in that perspective.
But thank you for raising goods movement as well. We haven't even touched on the whole regulation of the curb. That's a whole other discussion. Shigithia, I'm wondering about your team, and over the last few days we've heard about your technical plan. What new learnings have come as you look at that through the COVID lens?
Yeah, and I think I'm really just building off of what Tara has spoken about. I think we've really taken a more active approach to transportation during COVID. It's really allowed us to introduce initiatives like Active TO and Curb TO and this freed up space within our streets right now and try to move towards that as well. I think, again, just echoing what Tara said, mass transit is probably where even automation capabilities are most helpful right now, because you're able to physical distance more on these bigger transit vehicles. And that what we've really heard from industry in terms of contactless delivery and that side of things is really where automation is most helpful right now. I also don't know that these smaller shuttles yet are able to fully capture some of those needs with COVID at this point. We've talked about it a bit amongst our team as well. So I think just echoing what Tara said.
Right, that's it. I want to go back to some audience questions. We still have audience questions coming in, and we have a few more minutes. How important is data collection and data sharing? We've certainly touched on that within each of the questions, but specifically in coming up with more responsible policies and regulations for the piloting and testing of autonomous and connected vehicles. I'll throw that out as a jump ball. Jean-Éric, you are our data specialist. Any other aspects of data sharing that you would like to talk about?
It's all about, to me, it's all about the data sharing. If you don't have that in place and you don't have good data governance, your projects will not be a success. I've been looking at different projects all over the world, and especially in maritime transportation, they've been very successful. Port of Amber, in Japan also, they've been very successful at how data sharing has allowed them to upgrade and prioritize upgrades of the infrastructure, because it focuses on where you need to go. It helps prioritize. It helps government agencies come together instead of each fighting on their own. When you need to have the data shared, people get to understand the missing link in the projects. Yeah.
That's it. Tara or Shigithia, are there any other data sharing aspects that we haven't covered so far?
I think the only piece I'd add, some of the data pieces that we've looked at are also around just making the system more efficient as a whole. The more data that we're able to receive and help move vehicles in a way that's easing our congestion, and looking at that whole system aspect of it is super helpful. But I think Jean-Éric's covered a lot of how helpful it's been to share amongst levels of government and other municipalities, and how that's really helping move a lot of this work forward.
Wonderful. Again, we've got more questions coming in. For those, I'm sure most that are watching with us now have taken in the earlier sessions about financing and about the obvious huge costs involved in these kinds of deployments. So we have a question that given that transit agencies are facing major financial cutbacks due to low ridership and slow economic activity, why should we keep moving forward with any of these projects that have been mentioned, considering the financial challenges? Who would like to take on that financial aspect? There being City of Toronto, have you been having conversations? Obviously, the TTC has been very public about how much loss of revenue that they are experiencing on a monthly basis, between $70 and $90 million a month. These aren't numbers that were taken into account. What does that mean for the plans that you've had?
So I will say, in terms of a long-term vision around automated vehicles and introducing automation into transit, procurement's already been a challenge for our TTC. There's not so much demand out there right now. There really isn't a supply, and the technology isn't at a place where they'd be willing to incorporate it into our broader system as a whole. I will say that we also have existing goals around moving to sustainable modes. So moving to electric vehicles is a key aspect of TTC's work. And it's sort of within that procurement model that they're moving more towards that. But with shuttles, I'd say Toronto's definitely still in early days, probably because of that political will. We're only at the piloting phase, and our funding right now comes from the federal government. So I think that's going to be a key learning for us, and even understanding if this is something that works for our system with such a large transit system within Toronto as well.
That's it. Terry, you must be talking to a lot of different transit systems. How have the financial challenges over the last few months changed the conversation?
Well, I think it's apparent, and it's on everyone's mind, and it just has caused, everyone's just had to maybe rethink or change some priorities. But I mean, if I can say anything here, is there's a lot of complaints, especially around the GTA, right, about congestion and how we move, and that there is room for improvement in our transit system. So if we don't keep investing now in planning for the future and for what is to come, we're not going to kind of get out of the current set state that we're in. And so I think that's why we need to keep investing and breaking down those barriers, right, between those different levels of government, that they're coming together to invest in these projects, because these sorts of transit projects and transit movement have the ability to impact a greater piece of the population, I'll say, right, and really help in all those sort of equitable ways that we need to be thinking of.
Thank you. I'll jump back to the regulatory aspect here then, and pose a question about early stage pilots have not led to mass procurements or mass deployments. I wonder what your thoughts are on why not. Is it a set of regulatory blockages impeding these deployments, or are the technologies simply not achieving the goals set out for them? Jean-Éric, from a Quebec perspective, what has been the experience around those pilots?
We've made some progress. They're important progress, but we're not there yet, especially regarding autonomous shuttles, and also regarding platooning for the trucking industry. We put a lot of hopes in platooning a couple of years ago. And
so did pilots advance the discussion about regulation? Or were some obvious where there were some gaps that needed answered, or it wasn't really a regulatory issue?
No, it wasn't a regulatory issue. It was a technology issue. As I mentioned before, maybe the technology that was put in place in those projects was not optimal, but that's really what we're looking into, and that's what our engineers are finding out. We could have gone a little further, a little more could have been done. But again, somebody needs to foot the bill. That's always the bottom line.
Right.
Otherwise, those projects never would have been put forward.
Right. Shigithia, you were talking about vehicle standards. And I'm wondering if you can kind of reflect on some of the early pilots then, and how much more needs to be done on that front.
So I will say that the pilots aren't my level of expertise, but thankfully I was able to talk to Lindsay, who's leading ours, and a lot of what she's heard from her conversations with other cities who have done this, as well as through looking at what our regional and local transit agencies need is again similar to what Jean-Eric said, in that the technology is not fully there yet where we can really mass procure, but the vehicle standards still aren't at a place where it's suitable for what a full transit agency might need. We do need proper accessibility standards that meet all the needs of our agencies if we're doing a mass procurement at this point. And I don't think that we're really there yet at either a federal or provincial or local level in terms of vehicle standards and what our accessibility standards are. So yeah, I think it's a combination definitely of the technology not even being close to where we need it for mixed traffic and dealing with all of the safety concerns we might have with individuals, but also some of those regulatory pieces.
Right. Tara, if I can ask you, QTRIC is all about standardization, has had some great progress with standards. I'm wondering if you've seen some particular pilot projects that have taken us further than others around vehicle standards, standardization.
I guess my experience has been less in actually dealing with the vehicle, so I probably can't offer too much on that. I can kind of agree with my fellow panelists here, though, is that, like, you know, it's only been a few years that we've really been dealing with this, and from what I've seen in my experience is that a lot of the agencies are still trying to figure out what the technologies are available to them and what the capabilities are, and the technologies that are available, they're not advanced enough yet where, you know, the vehicles can be there. Like, in order to meet the existing standards, they still require to have an operator, therefore they're not really that cost effective. So I think there's still a lot of need for additional funding to kind of move this area ahead.
That's it. And now I think everyone has mentioned that human side, the labor side of things. We've talked a bit more about the vehicle piece of it. We have a question from the audience. When we talk about smart mobility and artificial intelligence, many fear that a lot of workers will be left behind and that people are scared about losing their jobs. How do you think policies should take workers and drivers into account while ensuring proper training and upskilling? I'm wondering, Shagithia, you must have had a lot of conversations about how important that piece is and who's being involved in those conversations?
Yeah, so our tactical plan, the city strategy, was sort of a 3-year process, and unions were invited to our consultation. We did speak with a number of different labor organizations to sort of learn what the major concerns are. I think it was still early days when we were doing that consultation, and there's still a ton to understand about the technology before we get there, but we've incorporated into our plan looking at reskilling where it's needed, ensuring that we have sort of standards in place around labor as well. But even within our own pilots, we're planning on having sort of operators on board, and there's still a major key piece of having people within our transit systems who are helping with those with accessibility needs and other needs. So we definitely don't see this removing the type of labor we already have there altogether. There's a lot to be done in ensuring that remains the case in the future, which is why we've incorporated those policy pieces, and we're trying to see that in our pilot as well.
Wonderful. Jean-Eric, what has the conversation been like in Quebec?
Well, I'd say it's a downside of COVID now. We've, because of the experience lockdown, because just prior to the pandemic, the economy was booming, and we were all experiencing a shortage of workers. So, and this is the most important work in our society. People driving trucks, people driving buses, they carry people and they carry precious goods. So, and then riding along huge trucks can be tedious at times. So it's from a safety standpoint. These are very skilled workers and important labor force in the society. But the shortage of those workers helped us move along and justifying some projects for platooning and autonomous shuttles. Now with the lockdown, obviously it's a different story. It's like we need We need this booming to come again. We need governments to invest once more, and then for agencies to foot the bill, and eventually the traffic will come back. We're not going to stay at home forever and work from home forever, and we'll once again need to rely on public transit to get vehicles off the road.
A very good point about how quickly the whole context has changed with respect to the labor market.
Yeah.
Tara,
and
any other
labor organizations that were very inclined to working with us. Now it's a different ballgame, obviously.
Very good point. Tara, any other experience from a labor perspective?
Just my thoughts, right, is that, we're not going to get there overnight, and it is going to be kind of a phased situation. But the idea is that hopefully at the end of the day, we're moving more people onto public transit by helping cover off that first mile, last mile. And with that, hopefully that means we have more vehicles that may still need operators or people to plan those routes. And I think there could be new jobs that get created out of that. But I do think that, the agencies are going to have to look at a strategy for that transition period. And it's always, I think, going to be a sensitive discussion.
That's it. Thank you. We have another question from the audience. We all know about the electric projects that CUDA has had and interoperability around those demonstration projects. This question is procurement of shuttles and interoperability between manufacturers a consideration in the regulations to deploy shuttles? Shagithia, can I ask you to start us off with that question?
Could you, just repeat that question?
Yes, it's about procurement. So is the procurement of shuttles and interoperability between manufacturers a consideration in the regulations to deploy shuttles?
Unfortunately, I don't think I have the answer on that. I'm sure our project manager on the shuttle would. I'm happy to follow up as needed. It may also be on our website already, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure on that right now.
Okay, no, thank you. Tara, any thoughts about interoperability?
I think as it goes with any of the different, modes of transit or different vehicle types that we get, that has to be a part of the discussion. And I think part of the which works its way into the regulations to make sure that these systems can communicate and function together, and that we're setting ourselves up for long-term success for the infrastructure that we're putting in place. Because if we don't have that, if we're not having that discussion, if we're not breaking down some of those political silos in order to have that seamless transit throughout regions, then I think the efficiency of the system goes down significantly.
That's it. Jean-Éric, with your data architecture hat on, what are your thoughts about interoperability?
Well, I would echo what the other panelists have said. I totally agree with this. It's the only way that mobility as a service can become reality.
Thank you. We do still have questions coming in. So a question about how have the incidents with autonomous car accidents influenced the regulations for shuttles? Do you monitor these deployments? Have there been any learnings out of the regulatory gaps with respect to the private car side when it comes to shuttles? Who would like to try to answer that one?
I can try to tackle that first. I will say, not on the regulatory piece, but around public opinion, I think that was a major hurdle. We've done our own sort of public opinion surveys throughout our work between 2016 and 2018, and with the Ryerson University within our region. And we saw really the way people reacted to this technology sort of see a decline after certain incidents like this. So that's definitely a hurdle that we're dealing with as a municipality. Regulation-wise, I think what was helpful is we saw a lot more safety guidance coming out post incidents for us to really be able to follow as a municipality. I don't know how that will translate specifically to transit vehicles, but there's a lot more guidance, I think, in terms of vehicle manufacturing at this point that industry was looking for quite some time after those incidents.
So is that what we can expect then? And it will always be lagging in that way? And the best that we can hope for is that there will be some quick deployment of those lessons learned. Is there any way to be more proactive about that from a regulatory perspective?
I think the industry as a whole is moving together. I feel like, especially with the United States and Canada, there's a lot of learning back and forth. There's a ton happening within the US that Canada is also learning from. So I think there's a lot of proactive work being done right now, a lot of guidance, but there still needs to be some learning around the safety of the technology. As I said, like level 5 is still, I think, a ways away. We don't actually have specific answers around how exactly that's going to look. So there is a benefit to being proactive and doing the research that needs to be done. But I think it's also helpful that we're not putting standards in place when we don't fully know what the answers are as well.
That's it. Now, Tara, have you had any experience, had any conversations where the experience on the autonomous car side has informed the autonomous shuttle?
I think they're closely related, right? So, you know, from that safety perspective, similarly to what the other panelists are saying, is that when you do have those incidents, it kind of, there's a heightened sensitivity around everything. And I think that does have a ripple effect on all of the projects. So, which would include the shuttles as well.
I'm just going to check here. We do still have questions coming in. I'm looking at our time. We have 4 minutes left by my clock. So I'd like to get in another audience question. SAE level 5 seems to be posing a lot of challenges around regulations. Do you think that it's realistic to aim for that level of automation for mixed traffic, or should we focus on level 4? Interestingly, that was one of our earlier prepared questions as well. And so the audience is on board wondering about that difference in focus and what we should be focusing on. Jean-Éric, any thoughts about level 4 versus level 5 focus?
Yeah, we're never focused on the end result. We're looking at the building blocks from where we are right now and just getting to the next step in every aspect. And the SAE level 4 versus level 5 has been tackled exactly the same way. So just as platooning, just as we're still at level 2 regarding platooning in Quebec. So we're just looking at everything we need to put in place for it. That doesn't mean we're not looking at broader perspective. This doesn't mean we're not looking long term. Sometimes we know the step to take, the next one to take. We just don't know the current one to take. But I'm actually very happy about this, to say that every effort that's been put in right now is to get to the next step. So it's to consolidate what we have at level 3 of SAE to getting to level 4. And hopefully we can turn the corner and start looking at level 5.
Okay, thank you. Tara, regulations that would be needed for level 5, do you think that is down the road and it's not posing a lot of challenges around regulation now? What are your thoughts?
So I think we always want to keep level 5 on the table, right? But I think, you know, we need to think of it as kind of a, you know, like Jean-Éric was saying, like it's the building blocks, right? And when we're talking about transit, if we want to move mass amounts of people through limited rights of way, then, you know, dedicated transit ways will be a great option, whether it's human driven, level 4 or level 5. And really, as a planner, and the way I think we need to think moving forward is to sort of have a system that can be phased, which means we can set it up so today, you know, it's human driven, but then it's going to get switched to automated vehicles when the technology is viable and we've got the right regulations and everything set in place.
Well, thank you for bringing us back to the focus on mass transit. That really is where the great benefits are. That's where we need to be applying our innovative solutions. I'll give you the opportunity for some closing remarks then, either on that aspect of regulation or anything else that's left unsaid from your perspective.
Oh, thank you. I guess just to quickly add to the conversation we're already having around level 4 and 5, I think Tara really hit it on the nose in terms of looking at dedicated transit ways. There's going to be a lot of challenging moments that we look to in the future when we have a mix of human-driven and automated vehicles, and dealing with that even from an infrastructure perspective, as Jean-Henrique has mentioned, is going to be something that municipalities need to tackle at first. But yeah, we've heard the same from industry that level 5 is a lot more challenging than initially thought. So I think it's still a question mark if we might even get there.
So if this conversation can get us to dedicated rights of way for transit and a real focus on mass transit, then there is that's the best outcome. By my clock, we are at 3:10. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. It was my pleasure to moderate today. Thank you.
Thank you.